we came into it, and, I've seen him have a better attitude towards electronics, towards technology, towards the games than he did before he was in there. And I think a lot of it was having this community of other kids who he was able to talk openly with and hear their stories and be able to tell his and go in and say, yeah, I mean, this is why I am drawn to this. And you and I had a lot of conversation about that, even with me wanting to work through my own technological, issues of spending too much time on my phone and these kind of things, where it was something that I had been working on my own for a while, but having somebody to sit down and talk to about it and look at the underlying whys of it, instead of just looking and saying, I know I spend too much time on Twitter. I know I spend too much time on, used to be for me, it was all my blog feeds, my RSS feeds and all this kind of stuff, being able to look and say, here's why I'm doing this. You and I talked a little bit about this particular game I'd started playing, and I looked on my screen time and realized, I've been spending an hour a day on this ridiculously, I didn't really get a whole lot out of it. It was just something to do, but I realized that what it was, I've got this collector's mentality. I collected baseball cards as a kid, and there's other things that have come in. I mean, even with the Dungeons and Dragons thing, it's like I've picked up probably more stuff that I need because I've kind of got this collector's kind of thing of wanting to have these different things. And so being able to look at that and see how that was driving my desire to be playing this game helped me to be able to understand, what I was getting out of it, what I wasn't getting out of it. And I deleted it off my phone and hasn't been back on there because I understood it a little bit better. And so I think that it is just, being able to dive in and look and see what's underneath it, which as a parent has helped me on my own end and also helped my kids, because before it was just, me saying, you can do this for an hour, you can do this for 2 hours, you're going to turn it off after that, and it becomes a battle. Whereas now we can talk about and go, why is it that you're spending so much time here? What is it that's drawing you into this? And so I think a lot of it is that the experience of going through the Virgils program has opened up dialogue to where before it was just a monologue from me talking about why you don't need to do it and why, you need to find some time to do some other things. And I think what it taught him was looking and seeing what I'm getting out of this and how do I translate that into some of the things that I'm interested in outside of the screen, and trying to put some time and energy into those things.
Really glad to hear that. I mean, so it sounds like some of the fundamental kind of techniques and some of the ideas, these are things, as we like to say, it's like, it's simple, but it's hard, eat right, exercise, like don't, like people know what they need to do, right? It's like, don't bring your phone in your room, but having that relational component, sort of something communal in the case of your son, but then we obviously were able to have a lot of dialogue to try to understand, what was at the root of whatever was going on with technology use was.
I think it's one of those things too, again, talking about what I said earlier, understanding that there are people that have studied this and spent a little more time with it than you have. And I mean, you knew a lot of tips and tricks on the iPhone and I thought I knew a lot about. And then you were able to show me some things that I didn't know that have very much helped me. And so building out these relationships where you're working with somebody, like I know for me in particular, I always work better with a team than I do by myself. One of my mentors, he sent me the letter that he sent to a group that was looking at me at one point as pastor. And he sent me his recommendation. And on that, it's like after he had sent it to them, he sent it to me. And on that, it said, Justin always has a lot of good ideas. He thinks outside of the box, but he needs a team around him to tell him what ideas are good and which ones are just plain crazy. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's absolutely true. And here's a person that has gotten to know me well enough to see that. And so I think, again, this is kind of one of those things where you're building those relationships, you're building that community out to where, you have somebody to go to when, you know, you're struggling with, you know, I'm getting too much into this particular thing. I need somebody who's going to hold me accountable. And so I
Mhm.
think that's been a lot of it for him, is it's helped me to be able to hold him accountable in a more healthy way, but also having these friends that he's interacting with. And he's starting in the inner circle program tonight. And so
Mhm.
I think that's going to be another good thing where, you know, he's building out these relationships in a more long-term basis. That's going to be good for him.
I'm really, really glad that we've had this opportunity to have you join us.
Yeah.
I'll say too, just personally, I it was always a pleasure working with you and Jennifer. I think one of the challenges for us going forward as a company is there are definitely some best practices, which are kind of emerging from the conversations that we're having.
Right.
Every week it was like, let's experiment with something and see
Exactly.
how it goes. And at the same time, it is, these are personal computing devices. Everyone has a very bespoke, very deeply personal relationship. And so that does require pretty significant degree of self-reflection, which can be helpful if you have a partner. And
Yeah.
that's always very
And I
personalized.
think
So
it's self-reflection and it's trust. It comes down
yeah,
to like some of the things that you and I worked out. Like I've done them in a slightly different way but I trusted you and said, well, I'm going to keep it this way for a couple of weeks and see what works for me and what doesn't. And, you know, one of the things that we did, we took all the apps off of
yeah,
my screen, and I realized that I needed to go back and put the 4 apps at the bottom, partially because aesthetically it was bothering me that there was that space there that wasn't being used. And then partially because I knew the things that I have to get to very often, and it's better to
yeah.
have it readily available than having to go and kind of search for it. But
Hmm.
so there's a difference between me and you where I learned something from you, trusted, you know, here's a guy that knows what he's talking about, and then looked and then changed it a little bit to fit me a little bit better. So I think that's part of the understanding that we have with, you know, the people that we're working with, you know, as
Hmm.
you and I are
Hmm.
working with parents, is we understand, hey, we've got some ideas, we've got some best practices, but the way they end up implementing it might look a little bit different than the way that I've implemented it. And that is a good thing.
That's correct.